Hey everybody, it's Beverly, and I wanted to sit a minute and share some information with you about something that I mentioned on my intro to my Bama Blind channel. Since it's a new channel, you probably don't know a whole lot about me, and you might not know a lot about blindness. But in my intro, I mentioned that my vision loss occurred early in life, but that was debatable. And I don't know if you caught on to that or not, but I kind of wanted to explain what that means and why I made that statement in my intro. I was born and really nobody in my circle of family, my parents, I have an older brother that's 2 years older than me, grandparents, aunts and uncles, no one knew that I had a sight loss. You couldn't see it in my eyes. My eyes looked absolutely normal. They looked healthy. And for all intents and purposes, I just had normal vision like pretty much everybody else in my family. There is one exception in my extended family of someone with a sight loss, and that was my mom's brother. And he had been legally blind since birth. And he had other physical issues and had some illnesses in early childhood that let his parents know that there was something different. He also had what is called nystagmus, or back then was called dancing eyes. So they could see that his vision was different at an early age. But for me, my eyes looked absolutely normal. I can think back to, well, I luckily have a memory that goes way, way back, and I kind of amaze my husband and other people that aren't a part of my biological family, that I can remember it way back to at least age 2 and perhaps even before that. But I remember in my mind not being able to see things that my older brother could see. And I just thought that as you got older, you could see better. So that explained it in my mind, in my 1-year-old and 2-year-old and 3-year-old mind, that, you know, as you get older, you obviously can see more things, and I'm just not seeing them because I'm young, and, you know, I can't even go to the potty by myself or bathe myself or, you know, do a lot of things. So I just figured it's something that came with age. But by the age of about 4, I started exhibiting some outward signs that I probably couldn't see well. Those signs were things that were obvious to my family. So when I read books, I would put my nose almost on the page. When and I say read books, I was actually looking at pictures and examining each page as best I could with the sight that I had. I also would sit very, very close to a television set. And in those days, television sets were big boxes that sat on the floor. Some of them even had legs. And so I would sit crisscross applesauce right in front of the screen, and my head would be blocking out everybody else. So I was asked to move away from the screen. And I found out when I moved away from the screen, I couldn't see what was going on television, although everybody else seemed to be able to see it fine sitting on a couch or in a chair. So I didn't put all that together. I couldn't see things like birds flying. Somebody would point at something and say, look at that funny looking sign down the street, and I couldn't see beyond where they were even pointing their finger. So I started thinking early, at about age 4, that I couldn't see like everybody else. And I think when my parents realized there's something going on here, they took me to an ophthalmologist in the big city near where, I was living in that city at the time. And the ophthalmologist did the just your cursory eye exam. They didn't have a lot of I think, expertise to examine the interior of the eye. But the ophthalmologist explained to my mother at that visit that there was obviously nothing wrong with my eyes. They were perfectly healthy. They looked perfectly normal. That I was, and I'll put this in here because this is what he told my mother, that she is mentally retarded and you probably should be looking for special schooling or perhaps even institutionalization, because this isn't going to go away. And thank goodness when my mother came out of that visit, I don't know the conversation she and my father had, but needless to say, within a few months, I had a second opinion exam, and this time in Atlanta with a specialist that specializes in the back of the eye problems. And I was diagnosed at that time at age 5 with macular degeneration. The central part of my vision was missing, and they were able to look back and see the macula, which is the center part of the retina, with some damaged tissues and cells. So they could actually see the damage, and then when I looked at things, they could see how I functioned, which matched the juvenile macular degeneration diagnosis. So from age 5 on, I was diagnosed with, quote, macular degeneration, the juvenile form. And as time went on and science developed further, I remember I was actually employed. I had gone to public school, then to the Alabama Institute for the Blind in Talladega, Alabama for a few years, and then returned to my hometown and finished high school, got accepted into college at the University of Alabama, and went to graduate school at the University of Alabama and achieved a master's degree. And doing all this, my visual acuity was 20/200 in my best eye. My other eye was 2400. It's always been worse than my right eye was 2400, my left eye was 2200. And the blind spots that were in my macular, which caused the loss of central vision, were at different spots on each eye. So every time I looked at somebody, it looked like I was looking slightly to the right of them. And so all through my life, just to get someone's partial face in focus, if I was 3 feet away from them, I would have to move my eyes a little bit to the right, and then I could see part of their face. Their nose would always be missing, their mouth would be missing, and part of one of their eyes would be missing. But I could pretty much get the rest of it in, but I couldn't distinguish, someone's face from someone else's face because I never could get a full face in. So after I finished university and got my first professional job, I was sent to the University of Alabama in Birmingham School of Optometry clinic. And that was my first visit there, and I had a whole group of doctors looking at my eyes at that point. And suddenly, I went from one doctor in the room to about 7 doctors in the room. And they were looking in and reading the paper and saying, it looks like she has got a diagnosis of juvenile macular degeneration, but we see indications that she has retinitis pigmentosa. And there are obviously some characteristics that ophthalmologists and optometrists look at inside the eye that can tell them, well, this is this disease and that's that disease. And in my case, they saw clear evidence of the pigmented cells in my retina, which did not look like macular degeneration at all. So I got a pretty devastating diagnosis at that point of inverse retinitis pigmentosa. Retinitis pigmentosa is a progressive disease, And I have been told all of my life that you've got juvenile macular degeneration. And macular degeneration will progress to the point that it pretty much, it might destroy the macula, but you'll always have good peripheral vision, pretty much always have good mobility or travel vision, which I did. I had excellent mobility and travel vision, to the point that I did lots of athletics. I swam competitively. I ran track competitively in high school, and did gymnastics, ballet, those kinds of things. So I had excellent spatial perception for someone who was legally blind. So when I was diagnosed with, when the diagnosis changed to inverse retinitis pigmentosa, I knew as a trained professional that retinitis pigmentosa is progressive. And so I knew that at that point, the dying cells inside the back of my eye were probably encroaching on my peripheral vision, the side vision, and they would not be contained to only the central vision loss. So I continued working. I began my family. I had 2 daughters. And at that point, there was no genetic testing. I did do genetic counseling. And what I was told when I was pregnant with my first child is that there's really no one else in your family that has exhibited this disease, so most likely it's not inheritable. So I was relieved, and when my first child was born and when my second child were born, both daughters, neither one of them had sight problems, and I got them checked early, and I got them checked by specialists. And you can check visual acuity. You can check even in infants, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. They don't have to be able to read the E-chart or the Snelling chart or be able to read for you to determine that that they're not focusing in on things. There are all kinds of tests that professionals give nowadays. So I was relieved to know that I had not passed whatever I had on to my children, and I just continued on with regular life, marriage and kids growing up, and I noticed that my vision was getting worse and worse and worse, and I was able to see less and less as my peripheral vision started failing. And then I started getting things like sparkles and a distorted look to my vision, so that when it was within my visual field and I could see it, say for an example, a doorway, it had always been pretty clear as long as I was within 4 to 5 feet of it and getting closer to it. I could see the perimeter, the top of it and the sides and the floor, but I was noticing sparkles and distortions, so that there were waves now starting to appear in the sides of the doorways, which made it a little bit more difficult to navigate. And I also noticed about that time that I was losing depth perception. I had always had really good depth perception for someone who had different visual acuities in different eyes, like 2200 in my left and 2400 in my right. But I could run up and down a set of stairs. I did that in track practice. I could see the stairs. I could see curbs and know exactly how far high they were or how low they were. So I had never had that issue. I could see shadows, which indicated those things. Well, all of a sudden, I was noticing that I had no depth perception. So I started tripping a lot. Luckily, I was pretty agile, and I didn't take many falls, but even I, with my lifetime of vision loss and with education in visual disabilities, with a master's degree in rehabilitation counseling for the blind and visually impaired, I I was having to experience what it was like to lose my sight completely. Um, and there's a lot that went along with that. So over the last decade or so, I have lost almost all of my functional vision, my travel vision. I've I've used sighted guide, which means holding onto the elbow of someone, and I've used my cane particularly to make sure people know that I can't see. It's cane for identification, but cane also, my white cane, so that I could have that as an extension of my hand and kind of figure out where I was. About a year and a half ago, I received a phone call from one of the doctors that had first diagnosed my inverse retinitis pigmentosa, and I had been affiliated with him. He was at the University of Alabama in Birmingham, and I live near Montgomery in Alabama. So I had been affiliated with him professionally, and then when I left my profession to continue other things like volunteer work and stuff like that, I had kept in touch with with some of the people. But this particular doctor, Dr. Nowakowski, called and said, I have a genetic testing facility in Birmingham, and I would like you to come and let me see if I can provide you with accurate diagnosis. And I explained to him that this was amazing. I had gone to the head of genetics at the University of Alabama about 5 years prior and requested a workup, and was told that they didn't do vision workups. They had no idea where to start. And for Dr. Nowakowski to now call and say, I can test specifically for vision issues. I made the very first appointment I could make. I was up there. He took an extensive family tree. He took an extensive history on my vision, and he had my medical records, of course, and he took my blood. And he did some testing to see exactly what my eyes could see and what they couldn't see, because it's hard, it's so subjective to report, oh, I can count fingers at 3 feet, or, if the fingers are brown or black and the background is white, I might be able to count them. If the fingers are pale and they're up against a pale background, I can't count them. I can't even see them. So at this point, he sent my blood work off, and about a month later, his office called and said, Dr. Nowakowski would like to make an appointment with you. So my husband and I drove back to Birmingham, and we sat with him, and I was waiting, thinking, well, this, at least he's taken the time to see me again and to explain what he has found or not found. And he came into the room with this beaming smile on his face, and I said, wait a minute, okay, something's up here, because at the age of, I think I was about 56, I explained to him this is the very first time that I can remember an eye doctor walking into the room where I was sitting and had a smile on his face. I've always picked up on the doctors that usually come in to see me. They speak to me, they're cordial, they're fine. I hated going to the eye doctor as a child because it was always so emotionally upsetting, because they would look at me and talk to my mom. They wouldn't talk to me, and it was kind of like I was a specimen, and it's not good news. It's always bad news. She can't see, and there's nothing we can do about it. So you have to deal with it. And that's another interesting topic that I will talk about at some other time. What the advice that was given to my family to help me get through life without seeing. But to get back to Dr. Nowakowski, he came in with a smile on his face. He sat. Have no idea how he knew exactly where to sit. So just a piece of him was in the little piece of vision that I happen to have, which is way over to my left and kind of down. And he talked to me and he said, I have found genetically what you have, and it's called cone rod dystrophy, and it is inherited, and you have ABCA4 genetic defect, and you inherited this from both your father and your mother, period. And I was blown away. And I was smiling and he was smiling. There's nothing that they can do about my eyesight. At this point, I knew I wasn't going there to get any correction in my vision. I was going to see if I could get any further diagnostic information or an explanation of why I am the way I am. And so he explained that it is a recessive, it's an autosomal recessive gene, meaning that it's inherited by both sexes, the male and female, and could be found in both. So I've done a little research since then, and going back to my mother's brother, who's deceased now, but I'm positive that even though he had nystagmus, dancing eyes, he had cone rod dystrophy. Nystagmus can very easily be one of the symptoms of cone rod dystrophy. And I don't have nystagmus, but it is hard for me to focus on something that I can't see. And you can ask any blind person. It's very difficult when they say, okay, now focus on my voice. Well, I can kind of shoot my eyes toward your voice, but I can't zero in and focus on something that I can't see. So I just thought that I would share my journey from diagnosis to diagnosis, and it's been a progression all my life, but now I know what I have, and other people in my family are eligible to be tested for this. This gives them some information in case they would like to be tested for it. Right now there's no treatment for it, but there's all kinds of clinical trials that are going on for cone rod dystrophy. And there have been some trial treatments even offered. So it's not all bad news for someone that's got that new diagnosis. I'm totally fine with my diagnosis, and I'm accustomed to not seeing. But when you get that devastating blow of a diagnosis of any kind, whether it be sight loss or a terminal illness or just a chronic illness, is somehow you deep down inside have to come to terms with that. And I've come to terms with the fact that I have this condition, and the people around me have come to terms with that. So that we've covered that hurdle. But I'm just thrilled that I got a clear diagnosis, and it went from mental retardation to juvenile macular degeneration to inverse retinitis pigmentosa to the correct diagnosis of cone rod dystrophy, specifically ABCA4 genetic defect. So that's all I'm going to say about that. It's enough information, but it explains why in my intro I made the statement that I've been blind since birth. I really have. It's been progressive, but it's been there with me since conception, actually. And I hope you've gotten some information out of this video, and I'll be happy to answer any questions or comments that people have. Hit the like button if you like this kind of information, and subscribe to the channel. There's a lot of stuff that I will talk about. I've got so much information about blindness in general, partial vision, and the continuum of blindness. I'm going to do videos on that because there's a continuum. But thanks for sharing this time with me, and I'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.